A single gunshot echoed through the narrow walls of Rattlesnake Canyon, startling a flock of ravens into flight as blood seeped into the parched Nevada soil beneath Nora Newsom's crumpled body. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, only to be robbed, shot, and left for dead among the towering red rocks, another forgotten victim of the unforgiving western frontier. Wade Forrester pulled his hat lower to shield his eyes from the relentless afternoon sun as he guided his chestnut mare down the treacherous canyon path. 3 days tracking a stray from his herd had led him deeper into these remote passages than he'd ventured in months. The cattle business in 1879 was unforgiving, especially for a man trying to build something from nothing in the harsh Nevada territory. His ranch near Winnemucca was modest but growing, though the solitude sometimes weighed heavier than the physical demands of the work. He would have missed her entirely if his horse hadn't suddenly balked, ears pricked forward towards something in the shadow of a large boulder. Wade dismounted cautiously, hand instinctively moving to his holstered Colt. Rustlers and Apache bands weren't common in these parts anymore, but a man didn't survive the frontier by being careless. What he found instead froze his blood. A young woman in a once fine traveling dress, now soaked with dirt and blood, lay motionless against the rocks. Dark hair tumbled across her pale face, and beside her lay a small valise, its contents scattered a few personal items, letters, and a daguerreotype of an older couple Wade assumed were her parents. "Madam," he called, keeping his distance in case this was some elaborate trap. When she didn't stir, he approached cautiously, kneeling beside her. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, and from the quality of her clothing, she was no local girl. Wade pressed 2 fingers against her neck, expecting the stillness of death, but instead felt the faintest flutter beneath his fingertips. Alive, but barely. "Hang on there," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. The wound in her shoulder looked bad but not immediately fatal. More concerning was the gash on her temple, and her deathly pallor likely from blood loss and exposure to the elements. From the tracks around her, Wade guessed she'd been there at least a day, maybe more. With careful movements, he gathered her limp form into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this mysterious woman who'd somehow ended up left for dead in one of the most remote canyons in Nevada territory. As he lifted her, a folded paper fluttered from her pocket. Wade snatched it before the breeze could claim it and stuffed it into his vest. Getting her onto his horse presented a challenge, but years of handling livestock had made Wade strong. He positioned her in front of him in the saddle, cradling her against his chest as he urged his mare into a careful walk. The nearest doctor was in Winnemucca, nearly 6 hours away, and he wasn't certain she'd survive the journey. "My place is closer," he said aloud, making his decision. "Hold on, miss, just hold on." Wade's cabin sat in a protected valley with a clear creek running alongside it, modest but sturdy, with a small barn and corral beside it. He'd built it with his own hands after coming west 5 years ago, a young man of 24 with nothing but dreams and determination. Now at 29, he had a small but growing herd, enough land to expand, and a reputation as a fair but private man. What he didn't have was any idea how to tend to a gravely injured woman. Night had fallen by the time he carried her inside and placed her gently on his bed. In the lamplight, her condition looked even worse, her breathing shallow, skin clammy and hot with fever. Wade dampened a cloth and wiped the dirt and dried blood from her face, revealing delicate features and a spray of freckles across her nose. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, anger rising in his chest at whoever had left this young woman to die alone in the wilderness. Wade remembered the paper he'd retrieved and pulled it from his pocket. It was a letter, the handwriting neat but hurried. Mr. Harold Jenkins, Winnemucca, Nevada Territory, I write to confirm my arrival on the 15th of June. As agreed in our correspondence, I will bring the agreed-upon sum of $200 as a dowry. I trust you will meet me at the stage as promised. I look forward to beginning our new life together. Yours, Nora Newsom. Wade's jaw tightened. A mail-order bride. And Harold Jenkins, he knew the man by reputation only. A silver prospector with a claim north of town who'd struck a modest vein last year. Rumor had it Jenkins was as mean as he was lucky. Nora, Wade said her name softly, looking at the unconscious woman. What happened to you? But Nora Newsom couldn't answer, locked in the grip of fever and hovering between life and death. For 3 days, Wade barely left her side. He cleaned and bandaged her wounds as best he could, using skills he'd learned patching up himself and his ranch hands over the years. He spooned broth between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow, changed the compresses on her forehead when fever raged, and spoke to her in low, soothing tones when nightmares made her thrash and cry out. On the morning of the 4th day, he woke from an uncomfortable doze in his chair to find a pair of startling blue eyes watching him. "Are you an angel?" Her voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. Wade nearly laughed at that. With his 3-day beard, disheveled clothes, and the dark circles under his eyes, he doubted he'd ever looked less angelic. "No, madam. Name's Wade Forrester. I found you in Rattlesnake Canyon about half dead. You've been here at my place for 3 days now." Confusion flickered across her face, followed by a grimace of pain as she tried to move. She stopped, her free hand going to her bandaged shoulder. "I remember the stage. Then men with guns. They took everything." Her words slurred as exhaustion claimed her again. "Don't try to talk now," Wade said, though she was already drifting back to sleep. "You're safe here." It was another full day before she was able to stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time. Wade brought her a cup of weak tea and helped her sit up enough to drink it. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester," she said, her voice stronger now. "I owe you my life, Wade," he corrected. "And you don't owe me anything." He hesitated, then asked, "You're Nora Newsom, aren't you, coming to marry Harold Jenkins?" Surprise registered on her face. "How did you know?" Wade produced the letter. "This fell from your pocket. I'm sorry for reading it, but I needed to know who you were." She accepted the letter with trembling fingers. "Yes, I answered Mr. Jenkins' advertisement 3 months ago. He sent money for my passage from Boston." Her brow furrowed. "The stagecoach was attacked just as we entered the canyon. 2 men with bandanas covering their faces. They shot the driver. The other passenger tried to fight." Her voice broke. "They killed him too. Then they turned on me. And Jenkins wasn't there to meet you?" Wade asked, though he already suspected the answer. Nora shook her head slightly, then winced at the movement. "The stage was running late. We had a broken wheel earlier in the journey. Perhaps he waited and left." She trailed off, not sounding convinced by her own words. Wade didn't voice his suspicions. There would be time enough for that when she was stronger. "You need to rest. We can figure everything out later." Over the next several days, Nora's strength gradually returned. Wade moved his bedroll to the floor of the main room, insisting she keep the bed. He continued his ranch work during the days, returning to check on her regularly. Each time, he found her a little improved sitting up, then standing briefly, then moving carefully around the cabin. A week after he'd found her, Wade returned from checking his herd to find Nora at his stove, stirring a pot of stew. Her face was still pale, and she held her injured arm close to her body, but determination shone in her eyes. "You shouldn't be up," he chided, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough without contributing," she replied firmly. It's just a simple stew, but I thought, well, you've eaten your own cooking for a week now. I wanted to thank you somehow. Wade tried to remember the last time anyone had cooked for him. Probably his mother before he'd left Kentucky years ago. It smells mighty fine, he admitted, washing his hands in the basin. They ate together at his small table, an oddly domestic scene that felt both foreign and strangely right to Wade. Nora asked about his ranch, and he found himself talking more than he had in months, describing his plans for expansion, the challenges of the drought that had plagued the region for 2 seasons, and his hopes for the coming year. "You've built something impressive on your own," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. Wade shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's modest compared to the big spreads." "But it's yours," Nora said softly. "You made it with your own hands." The simple understanding in her words touched something in Wade. After a moment, he asked the question that had been on his mind. "What will you do now? About Jenkins, I mean." Nora's expression clouded. "I don't know. I have nothing left. The robbers took my money, my clothes. Everything except the letters I kept in my bodice." She straightened her shoulders. "But I didn't come all this way to turn back. I made a commitment to Mr. Jenkins." "What if he arranged it?" The words came out before Wade could stop them. Nora stared at him. "Arranged? The robbery?" "Why would you say such a thing?" Wade sighed. "Jenkins has a reputation, not a good one, and it's mighty convenient that you were attacked just before reaching town with all your money taken." He leaned forward. "Mail-order brides sometimes bring a dowry, don't they?" The color drained from Nora's face. "Yes, $200, my entire inheritance from my parents." Her hand went to her mouth. "You think he had me robbed, left for dead?" "I don't know," Wade admitted, "but I think we should find out before you present yourself to him." The next day, Wade rode into Winnemucca, leaving Nora at the cabin with his spare revolver and strict instructions to stay inside. The town had grown considerably since he'd first arrived in Nevada, with several saloons, a hotel, a general store, and even a small opera house under construction testament to the prosperity brought by the Central Pacific Railroad and nearby silver strikes. His first stop was the sheriff's office, where he found Sheriff Daniels dozing in his chair, boots propped on his desk. The man was competent enough when motivated but preferred maintaining an easy pace to active investigation. "Forrester," he acknowledged, tipping his hat back. "Don't often see you in town unless it's supply day." Wade explained about finding Nora, careful to leave out the part about her being Jenkins' mail-order bride. "She was shot and robbed. Stage driver killed too, she says." Daniels frowned. "Ain't heard about no stage robbery." "Should have had word from up the line. This was over a week ago in Rattlesnake Canyon." "A week?" Daniels scratched his chin. "Now that's peculiar. Stage company would have reported missing drivers and coaches right quick." "Unless someone didn't want it reported," Wade suggested. Daniels gave him a sharp look. "You implying something, Forrester? Just wondering if you've heard anything about Harold Jenkins lately." "Jenkins?" The sheriff's brow furrowed. "Funny you should mention him. He was in here about 10 days back, reporting that his mail-order bride had run off with his money. Said she never even made it to town, just had someone telegraph ahead saying she'd changed her mind and was heading to California with his $200. Wade's suspicions solidified into certainty. "That's so. And you believed him?" Daniels shrugged. "Ain't the first time a mail-order arrangement's gone sour. Why are you so interested in Jenkins all of a sudden?" "Just curious," Wade said, standing to leave. "Thanks for the information, Sheriff." His next stop was the Silver Nugget Saloon, where most of the town's gossip circulated. He ordered a whiskey and listened. It didn't take long to hear Jenkins' name mentioned by a group of miners at a nearby table. Jenkins is buying drinks for everyone at the Dusty Rose tonight, one said. Must have hit another vein in that claim of his. Nah, another replied. Word is he came into some money from back east. $200, I heard. Something about an inheritance. Wade downed his whiskey and left. One more stop to make. The telegraph office was run by Morris Whitaker, a former newspaperman with a sharp mind and sharper eyes. Wade had done the man a favor once, helping his son break a wild Mustang, and Morris had never forgotten it. Need to send a wire? Morris asked when Wade entered. Information, actually. About Harold Jenkins. Morris's eyebrows rose. Interesting fellow to ask about. Has he sent or received any telegrams lately? Maybe about a mail-order bride? The operator hesitated. You know I'm not supposed to discuss private messages. This is important, Morris. Could be a matter of life and death. Something in Wade's expression must have convinced him. Morris lowered his voice. Jenkins sent 3 telegrams in the past 2 weeks, one to Boston to a N Newsom confirming her arrival date, one to Sacramento to someone named Dawson, and one to the stage office in Elko about a schedule. And received, one from Dawson, just before the Boston lady was due to arrive. Morris frowned. And none reporting any robbery or deaths on the stage line, which is mighty strange considering what the sheriff told me this morning about you finding a woman shot in Rattlesnake Canyon. Very strange, Wade agreed. Do you know this Dawson? Morris nodded grimly. Tom Dawson. Used to ride with the McCready gang until they were broken up 3 years back. Word is he still does odd jobs for folks who don't mind blood on their money. Wade thanked him and left, his mind racing. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Jenkins had hired someone likely this Dawson to rob the stage, take Nora's money, and leave her for dead. Then he'd fabricated a story about her running off with his money to avoid suspicion. It was a clever plan, really. With the stage driver dead and the robbery unreported, no one would be looking for Nora or questioning Jenkins' version of events. But Jenkins hadn't counted on a rancher tracking a stray cow through Rattlesnake Canyon that day. When Wade returned to his cabin, he found Nora sitting on the front porch, her face turned up to the late afternoon sun. She looked better than she had since he'd found her. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and she'd managed to wash and mend her torn dress. She stood as he dismounted, reading the grim expression on his face. You found something, didn't you? Inside, Wade told her everything he'd learned in town. He watched as shock, disbelief, and finally a cold anger moved across her features. He tried to have me killed, she said flatly when Wade finished. For $200. I'm afraid so. Nora paced the small cabin, her injured arm held protectively against her body. I sold everything I had after my parents died. Answered his advertisement because he sounded kind in his letters. Respectable, she laughed bitterly. I was such a fool. No, Wade said firmly. You were deceived by a practiced liar and thief. She stopped pacing and looked at him, vulnerability and steel equally mixed in her gaze. What do I do now? I have no money, no family to return to. I came west to build a new life, and now. You can stay here, Wade said, the offer out of his mouth before he'd fully considered it. Until you decide what you want to do next. Surprise flickered across her face. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition. I have the space, and to be honest, it's been nice having someone to talk to. He felt heat rising in his face. Besides, you're still healing. Nora studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, thank you. But only until I can find proper employment and a place of my own. Of course, Wade agreed, ignoring the relief he felt at her acceptance. And in the meantime, we need to decide what to do about Jenkins. We could go to the sheriff, Nora suggested. Wade shook his head. With what proof? It would be your word against his, and he's already spread the story that you stole from him. Daniels isn't likely to pursue it without more evidence. Then what? A slow smile spread across Wade's face. I think it's time Jenkins met his mail-order bride. 2 days later, Wade drove his wagon into Winnemucca with Nora seated beside him, her hair neatly arranged under a bonnet borrowed from Mrs. Peterson, Wade's nearest neighbor. The older woman had also lent Nora a dress that fit her well enough to be presentable. They'd fabricated a story that Nora was Wade's cousin, recently widowed and come to stay with him for a time. Their plan was simple but risky. Nora would confront Jenkins publicly, exposing his scheme. Wade would ensure her safety and hopefully collect evidence of Jenkins' guilt in the process. If all went well, Jenkins would face justice for attempted murder and theft. The Dusty Rose Saloon was busy when they arrived. Wade helped Nora down from the wagon, noting how she winced slightly when her injured shoulder moved. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Nora's chin lifted. "Absolutely." They entered the saloon together, Wade's hand hovering protectively near Nora's elbow. The piano player was in the midst of a jaunty tune, and the room buzzed with conversation and laughter. It took only a moment to spot Jenkins at a corner table, playing cards with 3 other men, a sizable stack of coins in front of him. He looked exactly as Wade had expected, a man in his mid-30s with a weasel-like face partially hidden behind an unkempt beard, wearing clothes too fine for a modest mining claim. The kind of man who valued appearance over substance. Nora stiffened beside him. "That's him. I recognize him from the photograph he sent." They approached the table together. Jenkins was so engrossed in his cards that he didn't notice them until Wade cleared his throat loudly. "Evening, Jenkins," Wade said coolly. Jenkins looked up, irritation crossing his face at the interruption. Then his eyes moved to Nora and all color drained from his face. He recovered quickly, but not before Wade caught the flash of shock and fear. "Do I know you, mister?" Jenkins asked, his voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in his hands. "No, but I believe you know the lady." Wade nodded toward Nora. "Miss Newsom has traveled a long way to meet you." The saloon had grown quieter, attention shifting to their table as patrons sensed the tension unfolding. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jenkins said, starting to rise. "Now, if you'll excuse me, you sent for me, Mr. Jenkins." Nora's voice rang clear across the saloon. "Your mail-order bride from Boston. The one you told everyone had stolen your money and run off to California." Jenkins' eyes darted around the room, noting the interested faces now watching the scene. "There's been some mistake." No mistake," Wade cut in. "Unless you count hiring Tom Dawson to rob the stage and leave Miss Newsom for dead in Rattlesnake Canyon." A murmur swept through the saloon. Jenkins' face hardened. "You're talking nonsense, Cowboy. I suggest you leave before I have you thrown out." "I still have your letters," Nora said, pulling several folded papers from her pocket. "The ones where you described your modest but profitable silver claim and your desire for a gentle, educated wife to share your life. The ones where you asked me to bring my inheritance as a dowry to invest in our future together." She stepped closer to Jenkins, her voice dropping. "Did you always plan to kill me, or was that a decision you made after you saw how much money I was bringing?" Jenkins lunged suddenly, reaching for Nora, but Wade was faster. He caught Jenkins' arm and twisted it behind him, slamming the smaller man face first onto the card table. Chips and coins scattered across the floor as the other players scrambled back. "Now that wasn't very gentlemanly," Wade said conversationally, maintaining his grip on Jenkins' arm. "Sheriff, might want to come see this." Sheriff Daniels had entered the saloon just moments before, drawn by the commotion. He approached now, looking between Wade, the restrained Jenkins, and Nora with open curiosity. "What's all this about, Forrester?" "This is Nora Newsom," Wade explained. "The mail-order bride Jenkins claimed ran off with his money. The one who was actually shot and left for dead after Jenkins arranged to have the stage robbed." Daniels frowned. "That's a serious accusation." "I have proof," Nora said, handing the sheriff Jenkins' letters. "And Mr. Forrester found me where I was left to die. The stage driver and another passenger were murdered." "She's lying." Jenkins spat, struggling against Wade's grip. "I never arranged any robbery." "Then you won't mind if I send a wire to Tom Dawson in Sacramento," Wade said casually. "Ask him about your recent business arrangement." Something in Jenkins' eyes changed, a flicker of panic that confirmed everything. "Seems we need to have a longer conversation," Sheriff Daniels said, producing a pair of handcuffs. "Mr. Jenkins, you're coming with me." As the sheriff led a protesting Jenkins away, the saloon erupted in excited chatter. Wade turned to Nora, whose legs suddenly seemed unable to support her. He guided her to a chair, concerned by the pallor of her skin. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled. I never thought I'd actually have to face him." She looked up at Wade, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for standing beside me." "Always," he said, then cleared his throat, embarrassed by how much feeling he'd put into that single word. "I mean, it was the right thing to do." They returned to Wade's ranch that evening, both exhausted but relieved. Jenkins was in custody, and Sheriff Daniels had promised to investigate thoroughly, especially after Morris from the telegraph office confirmed the messages to and from Dawson. For the next 2 weeks, life settled into an unexpected but pleasant routine. Nora continued to recover her strength, insisting on taking over the cooking and household tasks despite Wade's protests. He found himself hurrying through his ranch work each day, looking forward to returning to the cabin where Nora would be waiting with a meal and conversation. They talked for hours in the evenings about Wade's childhood in Kentucky, his journey west after the war, his dreams for the ranch. Nora shared stories of her life in Boston, her parents who had died within months of each other from influenza, her decision to answer Jenkins' advertisement rather than accept a position as a companion to her mother's sour-faced cousin. "I wanted adventure," she admitted one night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "A new beginning. Silly, I suppose." "Not silly," Wade said. "Brave." She glanced at him, a smile touching her lips. "I don't feel particularly brave." "You survived being shot and left for dead. You faced down the man who tried to kill you. I'd say that qualifies as brave." A comfortable silence fell between them. Wade found himself studying her profile in the fading light, the straight nose, the determined chin, the way a strand of dark hair had escaped her simple bun to curl against her neck. Something tightened in his chest, an emotion he wasn't ready to name. Sheriff Daniels rode out to the ranch 3 days later with news. They sat at Wade's table as the lawman explained that Jenkins had finally broken down and confessed after Dawson was arrested in Sacramento. "Seems Jenkins was in debt up to his eyeballs," Daniels said, accepting the coffee Nora offered. "His profitable silver claim played out months ago. He figured bringing in a mail-order bride with a decent dowry was an easy way to solve his problems." The sheriff shook his head in disgust. When he learned Miss Newsom was bringing $200, he hired Dawson to rob the stage and eliminate any witnesses. "And now?" Wade asked. "They'll both hang," Daniels said bluntly. "Murder's still murder, even in Nevada territory." He turned to Nora. Miss Newsom, the court will want your testimony when the trial comes up next month. Nora nodded soberly. Of course. There's something else, Daniels continued. We recovered most of your money. Jenkins had already spent some, but there's about $140 left. It's yours whenever you want to claim it. After the sheriff left, Nora stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the landscape without really seeing it. Wade watched her, understanding that this news had changed everything. So, he said finally, I reckon you'll be moving on soon. Now that you have some money to start fresh. Nora turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Yes, I suppose I should, she hesitated. I've imposed on your hospitality far too long already. It's not an imposition, Wade said quickly, then more softly, never that, even so. She smoothed her skirts, a nervous gesture he'd come to recognize. The trial won't be for a month. I should find somewhere in town to stay until then. Perhaps Mrs. Peterson knows of a respectable boarding house. Wade felt something cold settle in his stomach at the thought of Nora leaving. The cabin would be empty without her presence, no humming as she worked, no laughter at his dry observations, no one to talk with as the evening stretched long. You could stay, he heard himself say. Here, I mean, if you wanted to. Nora looked startled. I couldn't continue to, not as a guest, Wade interrupted, then took a deep breath. As my wife. The words hung in the air between them. Nora's eyes widened and Wade immediately regretted his impulsiveness. I'm sorry, he said quickly. That was too forward. I didn't mean to, did you mean it? Nora asked softly, taking a step toward him. Wade swallowed hard. Yes, I know it's sudden and you came west expecting something different, but these past weeks. He gestured helplessly. I've never met anyone like you, Nora. Brave and kind and stronger than you know. The thought of you leaving. He trailed off, uncertain how to express the emptiness he felt at the mere idea. I came west to marry a stranger, Nora said, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. But you're not a stranger anymore, Wade Forrester. Hope flared in Wade's chest. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, she replied with a small smile. I think we should court properly first. Get to know each other as a man and woman considering marriage, not as a rescuer and someone in need of rescue. Relief and disappointment mingled in Wade's heart. That's fair, he agreed. More than fair. But, Nora added, stepping closer still until she stood directly before him, I'm not going anywhere just yet, if your offer of hospitality still stands. Wade's smile felt like it might split his face. It does. The next month passed in a blur of work and quiet evenings together. True to her word, Nora insisted on proper courtship, supervised visits to town, chaperoned picnics with the Petersons, and always a respectful distance between them in the cabin. Wade built a small sleeping area for himself in the barn, insisting Nora keep the house to herself to protect her reputation. They rode into Winnemucca together for church services on Sundays, drawing curious but mostly approving looks from the townspeople who had heard the dramatic story of Jenkins' scheme and Nora's survival. Wade found himself standing taller with Nora on his arm, proud to be seen with her and protective of her newfound place in the community. The trial came and went, with both Jenkins and Dawson sentenced to hang for the murders of the stage driver and passenger. Nora's testimony was clear and unwavering, impressing the judge and jury with her courage. When it was over, she and Wade walked out of the courthouse together, a weight lifted from both their shoulders. It's finished, Nora said as they stood in the afternoon sunshine. I can truly start my new life now. Wade took her hand, a liberty he rarely allowed himself. And have you decided what that life will be? Nora turned to face him, her blue eyes clear and certain. I think I have. 3 days later, They stood before Reverend Williamson in the small white church on the edge of Winnemucca. Nora wore a new dress of pale blue calico, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Wade had splurged on a new shirt and had even let Mrs. Peterson trim his hair and beard for the occasion. The church was filled with neighbors and townspeople who had come to witness the union of the rancher and the mail-order bride who had found each other under such extraordinary circumstances. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Williamson declared with a broad smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Forrester." Wade hesitated for just a moment, suddenly shy despite the weeks of growing closeness between them. Then Nora rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips gently to his, sealing their vows with a kiss that promised many more to come. The celebration afterward at the Peterson farm was joyous and simple good food, music from a fiddle and harmonica, and congratulations from all sides. As the afternoon waned, Wade found a moment alone with his new wife beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Are you happy, Mrs. Forrester?" he asked, still marveling at the reality of their marriage. Nora's smile was radiant. "Happier than I ever imagined possible when I left Boston." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I came west looking for a new beginning, and I found it just not the way I expected." "Life rarely turns out as we expect," Wade observed. "Sometimes it turns out better." They rode home to the ranch as the sun was setting. The land spread out before them in shades of gold and amber. Wade had spent the past week making improvements to the cabin, building a proper bedroom partition, crafting a dressing table for Nora from pine boards, adding curtains to the windows from fabric she had selected on their last trip to town. As he helped her down from her horse, Wade gathered his courage for what he wanted to say next. "I know this place is modest compared to what you might have dreamed of," he began, gesturing to the small cabin and the surrounding ranch. "But I promise you it will grow. We'll build something fine together if you're patient." Nora's expression softened as she looked from the cabin to the man beside her. "Wade Forrester, when will you understand? It's already something fine." She placed a hand against his cheek. "You built this place with your own hands, just as you built a life for yourself through hard work and determination. Now we'll build our future together, day by day." Wade covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "I found more than a dying woman in that canyon," he said softly. "I found my purpose." Nora smiled up at him, love shining in her eyes. "And I found more than a rescuer. I found my home." He lifted her into his arms then, carrying her across the threshold of their cabin as tradition demanded, her laughter warming his heart as thoroughly as her body warmed his arms. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other anew, not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners beginning a journey together. Wade marveled at the softness of Nora's skin, the trust in her eyes as she welcomed him, the way she spoke his name like a prayer in the darkness. "I never thought I'd find this," Nora whispered later as they lay entwined beneath the quilt. "When I came west, I hoped for security, maybe companionship. I never dared hope for love." Wade gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I wasn't even looking," he admitted. "After 5 years alone, I'd convinced myself that the ranch was enough." His fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Then I found you in that canyon, barely alive, and something in me changed." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the Forrester ranch prospered under their joint care. Wade expanded the herd, while Nora established a thriving vegetable garden and began raising chickens. They worked side by side through the days, finding joy in shared labor and comfort in each other's arms at night. Word of Wade's fair dealings and quality stock spread, bringing more business and opportunities to expand. With careful management of their resources and Nora's remaining dowry money as investment capital, they purchased an adjacent parcel of land and began building a larger house, still modest by some standards, but with enough room for the family they both hoped to have. The winter of 1879-1880 was harsh, with blizzards sweeping down from the Sierra Nevada mountains and temperatures dropping lower than most locals could remember. Wade and Nora weathered it together in their snug cabin, reading aloud to each other by lamplight, planning for spring planting and dreaming of their future. When the first snowdrops pushed through the melting drifts in early March, Nora shared news that made Wade's heart soar higher than the eagles that circled above their valley. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder as he placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "You're certain as any woman can be," Nora replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Come autumn, there will be 3 of us at the Forrester ranch." Wade lifted her off her feet in a careful embrace, spinning her in a circle of pure joy. "I never knew I could be this happy," he confessed, setting her gently back on her feet. "When I found you in that canyon, I thought I was saving your life. I didn't realize you would save mine too." Nora rose on her tiptoes to kiss him, her arms circling his neck. "We saved each other, Wade Forrester. And now we're building something wonderful together." As spring bloomed across the Nevada landscape, so did Nora. Her body rounded with the growing child, and a new softness touched her features. Wade found himself watching her with increasing amazement, awed by the miracle taking place before his eyes. They moved into the new house just as summer reached its peak. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but to them it was a palace: 4 proper rooms, large windows to catch the breeze, a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the mountains. "Our son will have room to grow here," Nora said as they arranged their few pieces of furniture in the main room. Wade raised an eyebrow. "Son, you sound mighty certain." She smiled mysteriously. "A woman knows these things. And if it's a daughter, then she'll be as beautiful as her mother and as stubborn as her father," Nora replied without missing a beat. Wade laughed and pulled her into his arms, careful of her growing belly. "Either way, the child will be loved beyond measure." October brought crisp days, golden aspen trees on the mountainsides, and the birth of William Wade Forrester, after 18 hours of labor that left Wade pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Peterson and the midwife attended Nora. When he was finally allowed in, the sight of his exhausted wife cradling their newborn son nearly brought Wade to his knees. He approached the bed cautiously, almost afraid to believe the perfection of the moment. "Come meet your son," Nora said softly, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Wade sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny red face partially visible among the swaddling cloths. "He's so small," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "But strong," Nora assured him. "Mrs. Peterson says he has a fine set of lungs." As if on cue, little William opened his eyes blue as his mother's and regarded his father solemnly, before letting out a lusty cry that seemed impossibly loud for such a tiny being. Wade laughed through the tears that had unexpectedly filled his eyes. "He's perfect, Nora. Absolutely perfect." Life with a newborn brought new challenges and deeper joys than either had anticipated. Nights of broken sleep, days structured around feeding and caring for William, moments of concern when he developed his first fever, all were balanced by the indescribable pleasure of his first smile, the wonder of watching him discover his own hands, the sweet weight of him sleeping trustingly against their chests. The following spring, a letter arrived from Boston that brought both surprise and opportunity. An elderly cousin of Nora's had passed away, leaving her a modest inheritance, not a fortune, but enough to make a significant difference to their growing ranch. "We could build that larger barn you've been planning," Nora suggested as they discussed how to use the unexpected windfall, "and perhaps hire a proper ranch hand or two." Wade nodded, studying the figures they'd written down, "and set aside something for William's education. And maybe for his brothers or sisters someday." Nora glanced up from the sleeping baby in her arms, a smile playing at her lips. "Brothers or sisters? You sound quite confident, Mr. Forrester." Wade grinned. "A man knows these things." With the additional capital, the Forrester ranch truly began to flourish. Wade hired 2 experienced hands, expanded the herd, and built the new barn. Their reputation for quality stock spread throughout Nevada and into neighboring territories, bringing steady business and respect in the community. By William's 2nd birthday, Nora was expecting their 2nd child, and the ranch had doubled in size and prosperity. The small cabin where Wade had once lived alone now served as a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, while the Forrester family home had been expanded again to accommodate their growing needs. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, William playing contentedly at their feet while their newest addition, 3-month-old Elizabeth Rose, slept in Nora's arms. Wade looked out over their property, the well-maintained fences, the healthy cattle grazing in the distance, the neat outbuildings, and the comfortable home they had built together. Then he looked at his wife, still as beautiful to him as the day he'd first seen her truly awake and alert in his old cabin, her blue eyes filled with determination despite her injuries. "No," he admitted honestly. "When I came west, I hoped to build a decent ranch, maybe make a name for myself. But this," he gestured to encompass not just the ranch but his family, "this is more than I ever dared dream." Nora leaned against his shoulder, her free hand finding his. "When I think of how close we came to never meeting at all." She shuddered slightly. "If you hadn't been tracking that stray cow, I'd have found you anyway," Wade said with absolute conviction. "Somehow, someway, I'd have found you." 5 years to the day after Wade had discovered Nora barely alive in Rattlesnake Canyon, they rode out together to visit the spot. It was a clear, crisp autumn day, the kind that showcased Nevada's stark beauty to perfection. They left William and Elizabeth with Mrs. Peterson, promising to return before dark. The canyon looked different in the full light of day, less forbidding, its red rocks glowing warmly in the sunshine. Still, as they dismounted at the place where Nora had been left for dead, a solemn mood fell over them both. "I still dream about it sometimes," Nora admitted quietly, looking at the ground where she had lain bleeding and alone. "Not often anymore, but sometimes." Wade put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. "I'm not surprised. Some things leave marks on us that never fully fade." Nora nodded, then reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a small bundle of wildflowers she had gathered that morning. She knelt and placed them on the ground. "For the stage driver and the other passenger," she explained as she straightened. "I never even knew their names, but they died here too." Wade removed his hat respectfully. They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the lives lost and acknowledging how differently their own story might have ended. "I was so afraid," Nora said finally. "Lying here, knowing I was dying, so far from home with no one to even know what had happened to me." She looked up at Wade, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And then there you were, like an answer to a prayer I was too weak to speak." Wade cupped her face gently in his hands. "We both found what we needed that day, though neither of us knew we were looking for it." They rode home as the afternoon light turned golden. talking of practical matters, the new schoolhouse being built in Winnemucca that William would attend next year, the spring calving they were anticipating, Elizabeth's first steps that seemed imminent any day now. As they crested the final rise and their ranch came into view, Nora reined her horse to a stop. Wade paused beside her, following her gaze across their property, the sturdy house with smoke curling from its chimney, the barns and corrals, the bunkhouse where their 3 ranch hands lived, the garden she had painstakingly established in this arid land, the future they had built together out of the most unlikely beginning. "It's beautiful," she said simply. Wade reached across the space between them to take her hand. "Yes," he agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the ranch. "The most beautiful thing I've ever seen." They rode down the slope toward home, together as they had been since that fateful day in Rattlesnake Canyon, the mail-order bride who had been left for dead, and the cowboy who had found not only her pulse, but his purpose.